Hey everybody. So right off the bat, I'll admit that the question I'm asking in this video sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think it gets to the heart of why I'm making these videos. The question is, do Christians need permission to choose Jesus over Donald Trump? Now, the obvious Sunday school answer is no, of course, Christians don't need permission to choose Jesus over Donald Trump. We've got freedom of conscience, and obviously, we don't need to ask anyone's permission to make a political decision. But that's an overly simple answer, I think. And we know that human psychology doesn't lend itself to simple answers. And that brings me to how that question relates to what I'm trying to do with this channel. See, I used to spend a lot of time and effort reaching out to hardcore Trump supporters, thinking that they would appreciate my point of view. It was super naive on my part, but I actually thought that I could win them over with logical arguments and appeals to our shared understanding of the gospel and the role of Christians in the world. But I don't do that anymore. I'm no longer gearing my messages to hardcore Trump supporters because I've learned that they're locked into a point of view that just isn't going to change just because they hear some random guy like me on social media. So I've said before that that type, I think, only gets better with fasting and prayer. And even though I'm being a little snotty when I say that, I think it's pretty true. I'd like to get a cult expert on here someday and have them help me flesh this basic idea out. But I think that the only way a person who's deeply involved in the MAGA movement is ever going to recover is in the context of kindness, which means personal relationships with people who won't mock them, who won't put them down, but who can just walk alongside them as a friend as they sort through their belief system to sort of find the true parts of it that are buried among a lot of garbage and a lot of lies. And I think that that's really valuable work. But I don't think that you can do that through a YouTube video. I remember a Sting song from many years ago where he sang, "They go crazy in congregations, but they only get better one by one." I think that's true. So I made the decision a while back that I can do the most good by speaking to two main groups of people. One group is the easy one to talk to. They're those of you who basically agree with me already, more or less. And if that's you, then I hope that this is just an encouragement to you, and maybe that you can gain some tools through these videos that help you as you talk with people that you're in relationship with who are trying to sort through these questions. But the second group of people are my main focus, and they're the people who are troubled by Donald Trump, troubled by his MAGA movement, but they vote for him anyway because they think that it's their duty as Christians. That's who I'm really speaking to, and I think that there are millions of that kind of person out there. I've been told just this year by quite a few people who've already voted for Trump twice that there's no way that they're going to do it again. And they give really good reasons for why they're not going to. And if that actually happens, I think then if they're at all a representative sample, then I think that he'll lose in a landslide and that this whole MAGA version of Christianity might finally get discredited. But I actually don't have any illusions about that. I fully expect almost all of them in the end will vote for Donald Trump a third time. As much as they've told me that they despise him, they'll do it because he will be the Republican nominee, and they feel like they'd be doing something almost like a sin to vote against him. So I want to help that sort of person to feel the freedom of breaking that sick cycle that traps them into voting for someone that they despise. I want to help create a permission structure for people to make a decision that they know in their heart is the right one, and to not be browbeaten into voting for a guy in a movement who are just using them. So for myself, I voted Republican in every election up through 2018. So that includes 2016. I voted third party for president in 2016 because I couldn't support Trump, but I voted a straight Republican ticket other than that. And the only Democrat that I ever voted for before 2018 was Rudy Perpich for governor of Minnesota. And I voted for him because he was the pro-life candidate in that election. And the Republican, Arnie Carlson, was pro-choice. So I had to wrestle with my conscience in 2016. And in the end, my conscience wouldn't allow me to vote for Trump. So one thing that helped was that I went into the voting booth with one of my daughters. She had just turned 18, so this was her first time voting. And in Minnesota, you're allowed to sit with a family member and help them with the voting process. So I got to be with her while she filled out her first ballot. And I didn't watch who she voted for. I have no idea. But I encouraged her to follow her conscience. And I told her that I was following my conscience and that I couldn't vote for Trump because of that. I would have had, I think, a hard time facing her if she saw me vote for someone who opposes everything that I'd tried to teach her was important about how to be a human being in this world. Now, since then, the Republicans have driven me completely away from the party. But none of that change has been easy. So I understand that conservative Christians have been part of a system for years that really reinforces the message that part of their identity is wrapped up in voting for Republicans because of cultural issues. And that identity goes deep. Human beings don't just shed parts of our identity easily. It's really hard to change deep-seated convictions. And I think it probably should be. I think part of having integrity is to hold fast to our convictions and to not be moved off of them too easily. Paul tells us in Ephesians 4 that we shouldn't be like children tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. And James tells us that a person who has doubts is like a wave that's blown by the wind and tossed by the sea. So, yeah, we're to hold fast to our beliefs. But Jesus, knowing that, obviously, when he saw that his people were trapped in a religious system that no longer reflected the kingdom of God, Jesus spoke out against the abuses of that system and challenged people not to be enslaved to that system. He offered them freedom. He called them to shed their old identity and to follow him, to take on a new identity. So one of the saddest things for me during the past few years has been watching people that I used to respect bend the knee to Donald Trump. But when I step back from it, I can see that they're just caught up in this sick system. The consistent messaging that they're getting and the entire incentive structure of the system is built around propping up this lie that somehow Donald Trump is God's man for America, or at least that he's better than the devils who oppose him. So that brings me back to my question. Do some Christians need permission to follow Jesus instead of Donald Trump? Here's why I think that they do. Okay, number one, humans have a herd instinct. We all do. Jesus calls us sheep, and like it or not, it's a true description of what we're like. Even people like me who pride ourselves on going against the grain, sort of charting my own course, I'm still governed 99% of my actions by the expectations of the people around me. We sort of have to be in order for society to work. If I'm honest, I'd say that almost all the actions that I take in any given day are dictated by what people want me to do, what they expect me to do, from the language that I use, to the way that I drive my car, to the way that I greet people, the way I talk to people about the weather. It's all part of just these patterns that are built in. And we all operate in a whole bunch of different systems, and we sort of learn the rules and the expectations of those systems. So I've heard from people who describe themselves as neurodivergent that one of their struggles is with learning these rules and expectations of these systems. And it's sort of hard for them to switch from one mode to another based on the expectations of the people around them. But most of us actually get pretty good at that. And we put most of our actions on what I would think of as sort of like an appropriateness autopilot in order to get through our day. And that frees us up to focus on a few things that are important that day that aren't just sort of wired into us. And so in my own life, I found it's actually been really difficult to break out of the expectations that people have of me. And I've got a trivial example of that. So I'm a hat person. I like wearing hats. But for most of my life, I wanted to wear the kind of hats that guys in my circles don't wear. Lots of guys wore the kind of hats that I like to wear back in the 1940s, but not in Minnesota in the 21st century. So since I don't like to draw attention to myself, I didn't wear the hats that I liked for most of my life. But finally, in my 40s, I decided that I'd wear whatever I wanted to. So I bought a leather fedora, and it's this, and I still own it, and I still wear it most days in the wintertime. I love the hat. I didn't need permission to wear the hat, but it kind of felt like I did at first. Everywhere I went, I felt like people were staring at me, and this lasted for months, which might say a lot about me, but it didn't help that I have friends who tease me about it. And one guy saw me the first time that I wore the hat, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know it was Stupid Hat Day." But now I own about 10 different hats, and I don't think anything of it. I still remember how long it took me, though, to get comfortable with that one little change to my identity. So on a deeper level, I've had to go through some really major identity changes that took a lot longer, and they were far more consequential. When I was growing up, I was a serious Catholic, and people knew that about me. So you can imagine the process I went through in my 20s when I realized that I felt more aligned with the evangelical approach to faith than the Catholic faith, and the disruptions that that decision cost me in my relationships. I went through a very similar identity shift during the Trump years. But while people were disappointed in me when I left the Catholic Church, I never experienced a fraction of the pushback during that time that I got when I let people know that I wouldn't be getting on the Trump train. So if we wonder why so many Christians might think that Donald Trump is terrible but still vote for him, it's helpful to remember that they've been part of a system for many, many years that reinforced this message that we all vote Republican. And things like abortion were often the presenting issues to keep people voting that way. And I was part of that. I have actually still strong convictions about the sanctity of human life. And I was active in the pro-life movement for years before I went into ministry. I've come to accept more recently that our culture just isn't on board with making super strict laws against abortion. And it looks to me like people who are pro-life will probably have greater success in the long run by cooperating within our society to try to create a culture of life together, by trying to win over our culture through genuine acts of love and care for all of human life. So that's another huge issue, and it's for another time. But my point is that I know what it feels like to have to balance a deeply held belief like the sanctity of human life with the reality that there's this really creepy guy out there who heads a really creepy movement that's taking advantage of my deeply held belief to do a whole bunch of things that are reprehensible to me. But that's adult life in a complicated world, and I've had to make the adult decision that I'm not going to let myself and my convictions be used as a pawn towards someone else's ends. So I get that struggle. And it still stings when I hear people sort of flippantly comment about me that, for like the 10,000th time, that I want to murder babies because I'm not willing to bend the knee to Donald Trump. And that brings me to my second point. Because we are herd animals, there are people, populist authoritarian types will use like our cultural systems of control against us to empower themselves. What I mean by that is the easiest way to gain power over a group of people is to tell them that they have an enemy who wants to destroy their way of life, and then you set yourself up as their protector. That's what populist authoritarians do, but they can't do it alone. Authoritarians need to use some sort of force to keep people in line, and the easiest way to do that is to enlist the people themselves as the enforcers. So the MAGA movement at its core is authoritarian. It fits every one of the widely accepted definitions of an authoritarian movement. But my focus today is on this one thing. The MAGA movement relies on an abusive system of control to stop its people from even thinking about stepping out of line. And in the MAGA movement, evangelicals are the main thought enforcers. I'll say that again. Evangelicals are the main thought enforcers in the MAGA movement. Now, we see examples every day of this abusive control from the MAGA movement's leaders. And I just have to say that this is not politics as normal. So this past Tuesday night, during the New Hampshire primary, the Christian representative, Marjorie Taylor Greene, said this. She said, "Not only do Republicans support President Trump, we support his policies, and any Republican that isn't willing to adopt these policies, we're completely eradicating from the party." So that's not normal to talk that way in politics. And on Wednesday, Trump posted a threat on social media to anyone who donates money to Nikki Haley. He wrote, "Anyone that makes a contribution to Bird Brain," he called her, "from this moment forth will be permanently barred from the MAGA camp. We don't want them and will not accept them because we put America first and always will." So by the way, if you consider yourself a Republican and you think that you're voting for the Republican Party when you vote for Donald Trump, it's pretty clear that he doesn't see it that way. You're voting for MAGA, according to Donald Trump, not the Republican Party. But anyway, these are the leaders of the movement. But that same attitude has filtered down through the entire abusive system. When I spoke out against Trump on a Facebook page during the 2020 election, I got thousands of messages from Christians who threatened me with the fires of hell for daring to share my concerns about their chosen leader. So here's the thing. When you combine the fact that we all want to be accepted by our communities and our families, and the fact that some really abusive people are stirring up those communities to bully people into conforming with the goals of the MAGA movement, it's no surprise that people just go along with it. Most people, I think, are trying to just get through life. They're trying to hold a job, maybe raise a family. When they happen to share an unpopular opinion, it's pretty easy to just browbeat them into submission. It just doesn't feel worth the risk and the trouble to go against the bullying. And since not very many people are willing to bear that trouble and take that risk within the evangelical movement, it starts to seem to most evangelicals that maybe this is just the right way to go. And so that brings me to my final point. In order for any significant change to take place in a group or in a movement, someone has to create a permission structure for people to embrace that change. It's easy to do that if you're the head of an authoritarian group. Donald Trump has created a permission structure among his Christian followers to express their darkest selves, to give in to their petty hatreds for the people who don't share their beliefs, or to use bullying tactics to achieve political success, or to rally around slogans like owning the libs. Basically, to reject the way of Jesus for the way of the bully. And the entire permission structure of the evangelical movement right now is around support for this just terrible MAGA worldview. And all of the incentives are built around maintaining that structure. So what can people do to help people step out of that mindset? What can we do to be followers of Christ instead of followers of Donald Trump? Well, since most of the leaders are committed to keeping that structure of control and domination in place, I think it's up to individuals to create an alternate permission structure that gives people the freedom to follow Jesus. So that's what I'm trying to do through making these arguments and trying to bring together enough like-minded people that we can show the world that Donald Trump does not represent Christ, that he does not own the church. The church belongs to Christ, not Donald Trump. And people have to say it again and again and make arguments to defend it. But on a simpler level, just making the statement to friends and family that as a Christian, we've chosen not to support Donald Trump and the MAGA movement goes a long way toward creating that permission structure. And then others can start to make that choice. We don't have to defend it. We don't have to argue about it. We don't have to try to convince others to agree with us. We can simply say that as a matter of conscience, we've decided we cannot support Trump and the MAGA movement, even though we respect our loved ones who disagree. And that simple statement alone, that can start to build a permission structure for another person to say it, and another, until pretty soon this abusive hold that people like Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene have over Christians could be broken. See, the dirty secret is that there's nothing Christian about the MAGA movement. From a Christian perspective, it just doesn't stand up to even the mildest scrutiny. It's a movement built on the petty hatreds and the insecurities and the lies of one small man. And he's gathered some of the worst people in the Christian church around him who are willing to spread it. But when it comes to Donald Trump and the Christian faith, the emperor simply has no clothes. And it doesn't take a seminary degree or a background in political philosophy to point it out. It just takes one person pointing and saying, hey, the emperor doesn't have any clothes. And another person has permission to say, yeah, you're right. The emperor has no clothes. The MAGA movement has no foundation, and if enough people who do have a foundation will just push on it a little bit, it's going to crumble. I think that in the light of history, this is going to be so obvious. If enough of us are willing to point it out now, it could save our country and our churches from going through a lot of unnecessary pain. So, do some Christians need permission to choose Jesus over Donald Trump? Yeah, I think they do. And I think that every one of us can play a loving role in helping to grant them that permission. So thanks for listening.